Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to do some marker art and we are going to create this painting with markers of some bolts. And this is from a photo I took myself and it was a lot of fun to draw. And we're using a new product today, the brand new Ohuhu marker pad. This video is sponsored by Ohuhu. I'm going to show you how to use these papers and we can talk a little bit about what's different and how to use these versus other paper. You can see it's completely no show through paper, which means you can use both sides of the sketchbook. And the neat thing is this actually comes with a sheet with tips on it, and the sheet is actually on the same paper, so you can practice on that paper and not have to mess up your sketchbook if you don't want to. So some tips about this paper. If you're just coloring, you're going to notice that marker layers really well on this paper, but if you want to get a blend, you really need to saturate the paper. So I'm just going to show you in real time how to do that, but then when we get to the artwork, I will be time-lapsing it because it took me almost 3 hours to create. So if I want to blend, I'm going to saturate the paper with my lightest color. Then I'll go and do my typical dark to light blend. So I think I used GY3 first, and then I went in with GY8, and now I'm doing GY4 as my middle tone, and then I'm going to go back over with GY4 again. And that's going to give me a pretty good blend, and I can repeat those steps, those last 3 colors again in that order if I want to blend it out further. Now something you're going to notice on this paper is that it's going to look darker at first than it's going to end up, and it's going to look a little more patchy at first than how it's going to end up. And I would say 6 layers is probably a good amount for this paper because with the bleed proof layer, whatever is in between the front and back, I think there must be a lamination or something in there. Whatever it is in that paper, it kind of makes the ink puddle up a bit and look darker until it dries, but it will dry to a nice blend. Now there is enough tooth on this paper that you can layer up colored pencil, which is nice. I love to use colored pencil over alcohol markers, which I know if you're used to my content, you've seen me do that a lot. I think it's a great way to refine and also stretch your supplies if you don't have a huge collection of markers. Oh, I do have a 10% off coupon code in the video description that's going to be good through June 18th, I believe, if you want to save 10% on these sketchbooks or anything else at ohuhu.com. So I thank them for being a sponsor and sharing that coupon with us. And I wanted to show you there's a spiral pad that is 10 inches by 7.6 inches, I believe. And then there's a glue bound pad. So I'd say if you like a sketchbook, go with a spiral bound pad, because I think the glue bound pad the sheets may come out if you wanted to use that as a sketchbook. So you have 2 options. The pad is 9 by 12. That's what we're going to work on today, but the paper is the same no matter which you choose. So with that, let's go on to the tutorial and sketch these bolts. I've already transferred my image on my paper, so we're going to go right in and work on the shadows. And I'm using blue-gray number 5, so it's kind of a mid-value color, but I liked having that bit of a cool color to the shadow, a nice cool cast. And I am just kind of getting a feel for the paper and how much ink it's going to take. And I'm starting by just kind of doing the contour. I'm using the Honolulu brush tip markers, and I have the ones that have the brush tip on one side and the chisel tip on the other side, but they also come in brush tip on one side and bullet tip on the other side for the same price. I think that the brush and bullet tip would probably be the most useful iteration of these markers for most people, especially if you like to do any rubber stamping or adult coloring, because then you have the brush tip that can give you broader fine marks, and then you have that hard fine nib that's good for when you need to do details and not put out a bunch of ink. So I consider that if you're thinking about picking up any of these markers. And they come in a variety of different size sets. You can get a set of just grays that would be very useful for this project. You just need a brown in there too for the rest. But they also come in pastel sets, and then there's also a full collection set. So there's lots of different options there. They actually have like a 216 set, and then they have a booster set that would bring you up to the full size if you don't want to shell out money for all the markers at once, but you do intend on getting the whole collection. So, yeah, just there's lots of different ways to do it. You don't need all the markers, obviously, especially to get started, but I will say it is kind of nice to have a good variety of these because you are limited to how much you can blend. You're only going to be able to go like up 1 or 2 value jumps with a marker. So, and that takes a fair amount of skill, and it does take a fair amount of time. So, the more markers you have, the quicker you'll be able to create your artwork. That said, this just the coloring of this took me about 2.5 hours. So yeah, it took some time, but I enjoyed it. And that's the point of a hobby, right? To do work that you enjoy. So yeah, just basically filling in the shadows here. Now you can see on that first one I didn't really put quite enough down, so it's a little bit patchy. On the second one, I went over the area probably 3 times, and I was able to get a nice solid amount of color. This paper will take a pretty good amount of ink. Like I mentioned before when I was showing the real-time blend, it will take about 6 layers. And then I think after that you might end up getting kind of the ink puddling on the surface a little too much and sitting on the surface rather than absorbing in. And that's when you might get some sticky spots. So I would just kind of keep that in mind when you're working, that you want to try to get all the color you want in at least 6 layers, and maybe less. I mean, on the bolts where I'm doing more layering because I want to have crisp details, and I want to have crisp shadows and highlights. I'm not even trying to blend. I'm just going to do layers. This actually took quite a bit of time because I found that the paper did take a lot more ink than I was expecting it to. So keep that in mind. I don't think it's going to run your markers dry by any stretch of the imagination, but if you're used to using like a thin marker paper that's got the coating, like almost like a plasticky coating on it, this will take more ink than that. So it will also allow for more blending than a thin marker paper. It probably takes about the same amount of ink as like a Bristol or mixed media paper or like the regular Ohuhu black sketchbook. But I think you can actually blend with less ink on those surfaces. So, just kind of something to keep in mind. The ink will take a little bit longer to dry on this paper than, say, your more like absorbent marker pads or Bristols, just because there is, I'm pretty sure there's some sort of layer in between both sides to keep it so that you can use both sides. And because you can use both sides of the paper in the sketchbook, that makes it more sustainable because you get twice the use out of the product. And not only that, this is actually an FSC certified product. It carries the FSC certified mix label on it, which means it is made with a combination of FSC certified wood from certified forest and recycled materials and also controlled wood. So all of the wood that's gone into this product has not contributed to illegal logging or old forest deforestation. So you can learn more about that at fsc.org if you want to, but I thought that was pretty cool. Now we're going in and adding some brown onto the bolts for some rust, and I think I used BR3 for this color, but any sort of rusty brown is going to be fine. And I'm just throwing in the rust any place I see it in my photo. When you're working with markers, it kind of looks bad until it's about done, I have to say. And I thought it'd be fun to kind of pull in one of these Ohuhu wide markers to make quick work of throwing in some of that light gray coloring. I like it because it's just automatically going to give me that kind of blotchy galvanized look. Even though these have rust on them, I'm pretty sure they were at once kind of a galvanized bolt because they're not like rusted all the way through, and they came out of a swing set that was really, really old. We've probably had that thing for 20 years, and a tree fell on it this fall, so my husband was seeing if he could repair it because like the swing wasn't sitting right, and he took the bolts out and realized it was the bolts that were bent, and luckily the frame was okay. So he had those just sitting on the table. He took one with him to the hardware store to buy replacements. And I saw them and I thought, this looks so interesting and cool. And I thought it would just be a really great subject. So I put them on a white piece of paper outside in the morning sun and took a bunch of photos. And I just love the way the shadows look. So, inspiration is all around us. We just need to look for it. And I like to get my shadows in. I don't like to kind of fuss around the edges. I like to just jump in and see what the colors look like. I did use my color swatches that came with the Ohuhu markers to kind of hold to my reference photo and see about what shade of gray I needed. But I'm using a mixture of warm grays and cool grays because if you look at the reference photo, look how cool blue my shadows are. Look how warm gray some of the heads of the bolts are. Look how cool gray some of the reflections are. I've got all these different shades and temperatures of grays to work from and values that I'm using it all. I'm going with all those different tones. And you may have a set of markers that have some warm grays and some cool grays and some natural grays and some green grays. And you may think, oh, I wish I just had one range of cool gray or one range of warm gray. But you know what? Sometimes that doesn't happen. So layer them up. If you layer them up, because markers are a transparent medium, the light will go through those different layers of marker, hit the paper and bounce back at you and kind of blend those tones together. So So if that's what you got, a mixture of different temperature grays, use them together and just glaze over them with one unifying gray to help them all kind of mix, I guess, to kind of cross-pollinate together. That happens a lot, especially when we start off with maybe like a set of 120 markers or a set of 48 markers or something. You're not going to have a full range of anything. You're going to have to mix and blend and make it work. And that's going to make you a stronger artist. Now, a couple of these bolts are actually pretty, maybe like 3 of the bolts out of these are straight, and you'll see later on I actually pull in a little ruler to draw against, because I did have the markers a little bit wonky in places, so my lines a little bit wonkier than I intended them to be. Like I'm looking at that dark line on the bolt at the left there. That's really a little too wobbly, but we pull it together in the end. I always find that I kind of start off with a really pristine line artwork to begin with, but oftentimes I'm starting off with real wonky sketches and just kind of refining as I go. And that's why I do my fine lining last. And I just want to introduce that as a topic or as a technique, because I find that a lot of, and this is probably because a lot of people are very good at making, at like drawing on a screen, and I don't have the technology to like sketch on a screen. So I just tend to use like a really light color erase pencil and just sketch right on my paper. So I'm just kind of sketching broad and refining as I go. So I do my fine lining last, because then I know what lines I want to keep, what lines are true, and that helps me get a better look. And also sometimes I decide I don't want to fine line, or maybe I don't want to outline everything. I just want to add some details here and there. It gives me that option. And it helps me from making the work look too cartoony, because if I fine lined at first and I drew, really crisp outlines around everything, then it's going to always have that hard outline. It's always going to be cartoony. But if I wait till the end and then I use different widths, like maybe I want a heavy line here, maybe I want a light line here, maybe I want no outline here because I want it to kind of fade away, or I know that line is wrong, so I'm not going to outline it and, draw attention to the fact that it's wrong. It gives me that flexibility, and it also gives me a little more realism, because when you're looking at something, you don't see everything as absolutely crisp and in focus. Some things are going to be fuzzy. Some things are going to fall into the shadow and not have a crisp outline. And you can do that if you save your fine lining for last. So just something to kind of think about. I also like to add colored pencil towards the end for bringing back highlights. Like if I didn't reserve my whites perfectly on some of those bolts, or if I want a kind of a fuzzy, rough, like metal texture, like on some of the bolt heads that are really kind of matte, I can do that easily with a colored pencil and get that texture back in there. So those are a couple tricks I like to use with my marker art to help them look the way that I want it to look. I'm not really into doing cartoon characters or cartoony look things, even though some of my stuff does end up looking cartoony. I'm usually trying to get more, maybe not like, I'm not going for photorealism, but I am going for like a representational look generally. I'm kind of like in that, if there's a spectrum between photorealism and cartoony, I'm probably a little bit closer to the cartoony side, like in the middle, but a little bit closer to cartoony. But that's a look I like. I like things to be a little bit glossed up and a little bit, I don't know, I like to show the beauty in the ordinary, right? When I see a pile of rusty keys, other people might be like, throw that trash away. And I'm like, ooh, that'd be pretty to paint. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's what I like to say. I like to say we as artists get to show the muggles the beauty of the world, I guess, in the ordinary, the beauty in the ordinary. Anyway. But this was fun. It was kind of repetitive, I have to say. This is kind of one of those projects that you might do if you just feel like puttering around, playing with your markers, maybe listening to a podcast or an audiobook, or having your favorite TV show on in the background, something like that. It's a skill builder. It does build your skills, because you have to keep looking back and saying, where do I see that shadow? Where do I see that highlight? Where do I, what kind of line is this? Is this line straight? Is it bendy? Is it rough? Is it smooth? What textures are here? So there's plenty of challenge that way, but it is a little monotonous because you're doing the same thing over and over again. You could definitely just do one of these bolts and have a grand old time and, call it a day, maybe put it on a bookmark or something like that. But I just, when I saw those bolts just sitting there, I love those snapshots in time. And that's definitely what this was to me. I'm using some yellow gray to warm up some of the tones on the bolts where I see them and some of the highlights. And you can see your undertones on your images if you take a photo of it and crank up the saturation in your phone or on your computer, and that will help you see those undertones if you're not quite sure exactly what you're dealing with. Some things that can have purple undertones or yellow or green or blue, and the larger set of Ohuhu markers has a remarkable set of grays, so if you really want that division of color, it's a really fun set of markers to use. Now we're going into the fine lining portion of this video. Actually, my camera shut off and I didn't realize it, so but it's very repetitive. We do the same thing to all the bolts as we go through. And I'm just going in, and this is a 0.03 Ohuhu fine liner. They have a few different fine liners. They have some that are liquid filled, so there's like ink sloshing around in the middle of the pen. It has a lot of ink in it. They're a little bit more expensive, but you're getting more ink. Then there's the ones that are disposable. Well, I think they're all disposable, but this one here that has the felt pad in the center, and you get a variety of different nibs. It really just depends on what you prefer. They're all good. I've tried them all. I think the ink might dry a little bit more slowly with the liquid filled fine liner than the regular felt tip fine liner. So I use them both. They're great. This might be an advantage on marker paper just because you have less likelihood of smearing it. And I'm kind of outlining the wonky bolts right now, and I'm looking at my reference photo to really see the detail on some of those washers, because I know I had the ellipse a little off on some of them, so I'm going to try to push things back where they need to be while I'm doing the fine lining. So, you know, you're always revising, I think, when you're doing a piece of marker art. And here I've just got a little clear ruler. I'm trying to straighten up some of my edges there where they got a little wonky. Now, I love the little peaks of light in between the shadows and the bolts sometime. And at some point during this painting, I flipped around my reference photo. I was going to have the shadows on the right hand side, but at some point when I was like blocking in the shadow, I flipped my picture upside down, and then I started looking at this as it was right side up. And you'll see I did flip my reference photo halfway through too as I was doing that. But and honestly, I saw my name when it was like this, and then I thought, oh, wait a minute, I was intending it on being the other way, but c'est la vie, there it is. And actually, it's one of those, because I shot the photo straight overhead, it could go either way. And I just thought this was such a fun project that I think it would be really great to do in watercolor and use like a granulating watercolor for the shadows. So if you're interested in that, let me know. I think I'm going to do it anyway, but I'll film it if you guys want to see it. Maybe I'll do it on a live stream. I don't know. I'm really curious about that. I think it would be really fun to do. So, and I've got a, you know, template already made for it, so I wouldn't even have to redraw it. I could just transfer it. So that would be kind of a fun, easy one to do. And I know it would take less time in watercolor because laying in the shadow took a remarkably long time. I was really quite surprised at that. But I'm really happy with how it came out, to be honest. I think this would be really fun, and I kind of would love to frame it and hang it, but it's done with alcohol markers, and alcohol markers are notoriously fading. So if I do frame it and hang it up, I might have to put it in my husband's workshop or something, because I just know it would not last long. Although, you know what, it's shades of gray, so it might hold up better than vibrant colors. Maybe I'll do a test. Maybe I'll frame it and put it up somewhere, and we'll see how it does. I could swatch out the markers in the border that's going to be like under the frame or something, and we could see. I could swatch out the markers I used on the backside, and then we could take it out in like a year and see how much it faded. That would be an interesting. Little experiment to do. Will I do it? Who can say? I don't know. Here I'm using a white Prismacolor pencil to put my highlights back in. I tend to use Prismacolor pencils a lot for mixed media work just because they're very opaque and they stick to a lot of different papers. Even a slick marker paper, Prismacolors stick really well to. But other alternatives would be Derwent ChromaFlow and Derwent Colorsoft. Those are both very opaque and waxy. For budget pencils, ArtX, MarkArt, Artisto, Marco, Tribute, Arteza. There's a lot of wax-based budget pencils too that would work for this. So don't feel like you have to go and buy anything special, whatever pencils you have. And I love that little bounced reflection by just going in at the edge of the straight bolts with a ruler. You get that little crisp bounce of light that's just perfect with a colored pencil. And here I have a Ohuhu gel pen too. I was going in for my brighter highlights. And they have a gel pen set that gives you three of each, white, gold, and silver gel pens. So if you like to do the white highlights, it's nice. If you want to do, but you also like to write on like black cards for like, I don't know, maybe you like to mail things in black envelopes. The silver and the gold are nice for that, or for like Christmas projects for addressing Christmas envelopes and things like that. They're kind of nice. So that's something to consider. It's pretty affordable, especially for the amount of gel pens you get. And I'll link all these products down below to ohuhu.com, where you can save 10% with my coupon code. And I'm really wondering what I have on my sleeve there, because I'm sorry, that looks really gross. I'm pretty sure it's paint. But oh, you cannot take me anywhere. I'm a professional. I'm a professional. A professional what? I haven't figured that out yet, but I'm a professional. Here's some marker. Here's some marker art. I don't know. I'm a sketchy hobo artist, basically, is what I am. But it's fun. It's fun. And yeah, I love this. I love this stage. The last, like, half an hour of when you're working on artwork, or even the last 10 minutes, because you're putting in the pretties, you're putting in the highlights, you're putting in those dark lines, you're defining the good stuff, you're adding crispness, you're adding detail. That's where it's at, man. So if you're not happy with your marker work, if you're like, oh, it's just too messy looking, it looks so unprofessional, I don't think I'll ever get to the realism I want to get to, just keep going. Don't give up. I think a lot of times when people are unhappy with their work, they're just not done yet. There's so many layers you can still add. There's so much refinement you can still do. It's like building a house and stopping before you put the sheetrock on the walls, or putting the sheetrock on the walls, and you can tell it's a house and it's a room, but you haven't painted it yet. I mean, you've done all the really hard stuff. You've done 90% of the work to build that house. Do the last 10%. Paint the walls, put down the flooring, put up some curtains. You've done the hard stuff. You've done the framework. Now do the pretty stuff that's really fun, that you're almost there. So I want to encourage you to look through your old sketchbooks, and if you see some artwork that you were just not happy with, you gave up too early, finish it, for goodness sake. You've done the hard stuff. Sometimes we give up on a picture, right? Because we're just like, I made some fatal flaw in the beginning, and I'm just going to start over. That's why I do the really bold stuff first. That's why I put in the dark shadows. That's why when I was starting to color in some of those bolts, I was getting in the dark grays, because if I'm going to fail, I want to fail fast and restart it. But once you've gotten to this point where you've got the structure down, you've got the foundation, you've got the framework, then finish it. Get out the fine liners, get out the colored pencils, get out the white gel pens, add those sparkles, add those pretties, and see what you can create. And don't be afraid to grab a ruler if you need a sharp, straight line. Don't be afraid to grab a template if you need a sure curved line. Those are tools. They are there to help you. There's nothing wrong with using them. Don't be afraid to get an artist bridge if your hand trembles. I like to draw from my shoulder a lot because I get smoother lines, but end of the day, too many cups of coffee, I might be a little shaky. There's nothing wrong with getting a bridge tool so you can kind of hover over your artwork. There's nothing wrong with using a French curve to get a curve that you want, or using a ruler to get a straight line that you want. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Use the tools to your disposal to get the look that you want. At the end of the day, it's what you've got on the paper that matters, right? Practice. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, and enjoy the process, because it's a fun process, and our hobby should be fun, and our hobby should be affordable. And don't feel like you need to go buy that set of 320 markers. I think that one thing I'll say about many of the art brands out there, and Ohuhu is in this category for sure, is they design their smaller assorted sets with the beginner in mind. If you buy a set of 48 or you buy a set of 72, they're going to do their darndest to put the most useful colors in there that most people will need. The other thing I really like about Ohuhu is that they have pastel sets, and that's where I find it is lacking in a lot of assorted sets of markers. There's not enough light shades to get you by on the blending. So if you already have a bunch of random markers, you could get the Ohuhu pastel set, and that could really help you. Or you could buy the gray set and get a really good foundation to do a project like this. I like that it kind of meets you where you're at and where your needs are, and you don't necessarily have to go buy that really large set to get what you need. You can, it's there, it's cheaper per marker if you just jump right in with a big set from the get-go, but you might not know if you like markers yet. And that's a foolish investment to make if you don't know if you like markers, or if you're on a budget, you know, get what fits in your budget so you can make the artwork that you want to make. And there you have it. There it is, all done. I'm so super happy with how this came out. I want to thank Ohuhu for sponsoring this video and for creating such affordable, wonderful products for artists. And if you'd like to save 10%, check out the coupon code in the video description. Everything will be linked below. I want to thank you so much for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.